A United States Navy ballistic missile submarine arrived in Gibraltar this morning. CBS News was allowed to know this. And I want you to stop and think about that sentence very carefully before I say anything else. The United States Navy does not publish submarine locations, ever. A submarine's entire military value depends on the enemy not knowing where it is. When the Navy allows a ballistic missile submarine location to appear in the news, it is not an accident. It is not a leak. It is a deliberate decision made at the highest levels of the American military. It is Washington picking up a telephone and calling Tehran, not with words, but with the most powerful signal in the American military arsenal. That submarine carries enough firepower to change the entire military situation in Iran in a single night. And today the world was allowed to know exactly where it is. That is not news. That is a warning. And that warning is landing in Tehran at the exact moment when the diplomatic process between the United States and Iran has publicly collapsed. CNN reported this morning that President Trump has become more seriously frustrated with Iran's handling of negotiations than he has been at any point in the last several weeks. He is not just frustrated with the closed Strait of Hormuz, though that frustration is real and it is deep. He is frustrated with something more specific, something that gets to the heart of why these talks have failed. Trump sees divisions within Iran's leadership that are preventing Tehran from making any meaningful concessions on the nuclear issue, and he is right to see them. Because those divisions are real, they are structural, and they explain everything about why Iran's response to the American 14-point proposal was so far from anything Washington could accept. Let me explain those divisions carefully because they matter enormously for understanding where this crisis goes next. When the United States and Israel assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei on February 28th, they did not just remove a leader. They removed the one person inside the Iranian system who had the authority to override every other faction and make a final decision. Mujtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, does not have that authority yet. He has the title, he has the position. But inside the Iranian system, there are multiple power centers: the IRGC commanders, the hardline political factions, the pragmatists around President Pezeshkian, who are all competing to shape Iran's negotiating position. And Israeli intelligence, which tracks Iranian leadership dynamics with extraordinary precision, has assessed this week that Mojtaba Khamenei himself is a major obstacle in the negotiations and will not compromise. If that assessment is correct, and I believe it is, then the talks are not failing because of a specific technical disagreement about uranium enrichment percentages. They are failing because the person at the top of the Iranian system has decided that compromise is unacceptable, and no amount of Pakistani mediation, no amount of diplomatic creativity resolves that problem. Trump's national security team met today to discuss the options. Axios has the clearest reporting on what those options actually are. The first option is restarting Project Freedom, the suspended American naval escort operation in the Strait of Hormuz that was paused when Iran made it too costly to continue. The second option is resuming airstrikes against the remaining 25% of Iranian military targets that the United States military identified before the campaign was paused in March. Think about what that number means. 25% of the original target list has never been hit. 1/4 of the Iranian military infrastructure that American planners identified as needing to be destroyed to achieve the campaign's objectives is still standing, still functional, still capable of being used against American forces and American allies. 25% is not a small number. It represents significant Iranian military capability that survived the first phase of the campaign. Resuming strikes against that 25% is not starting a new war. It is finishing the job that was paused when diplomacy appeared to offer a faster path. That path has closed, and the job is still there. The third option is the most dramatic and the most risky, and both Trump and Netanyahu made comments in the last 24 hours pointing directly at it. An operation to physically retrieve or secure Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. Iran currently holds approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. 60%. The distance between 60% enriched uranium and 90%, which is weapons grade, is a matter of weeks in a functioning centrifuge facility. Iran has refused to ship that material out of the country. Iran has refused to accept the American demand for a 20-year freeze on enrichment. Iran has offered only to dilute the material to 3.7 and 20% under international supervision, which is a reversible gesture that can be undone the moment Iran decides to re-enrich. So the question on the table is this: if Iran will not send the uranium out voluntarily, and if the diplomatic process has collapsed, what does America do about 440 kilograms of material that is a short technical step from a nuclear weapon? The answer that is now being seriously discussed in Washington and Jerusalem is a special forces operation to take it. Trump says it is highly risky. He is right that it is highly risky. But the alternative, allowing Iran to sit on that material indefinitely while negotiations go nowhere and the Strait stays closed, is also a risk. It is just a slower and less visible one. Now let me talk about the naval picture, because what the ship positions tell us today is significant, and it is being underreported in the coverage. USS Tripoli and a destroyer were spotted this morning in the Arabian Sea, 66 kilometers off the coast of Oman, at coordinates that put them outside the immediate Strait of Hormuz operating area. There are 2 carrier strike groups in the region and additional smaller vessels. And the key word in the reporting is that they have moved further away. The American naval forces have repositioned. They have pulled back from the most exposed positions near the strait. This is not retreat. This is repositioning. In military terms, you pull back to positions of greater tactical safety when you are preparing for an operation that will require you to move forward aggressively and quickly. You do not want your ships sitting in exposed positions when you give the order to act. You want them at a safe distance, ready to surge forward on command. The movement of USS Tripoli and the carrier strike groups further from the strait, combined with the ballistic missile submarine arriving in Gibraltar, paints a picture of American forces reorganizing themselves for a potential next phase of operations rather than standing down. The UAE confirmation from the Wall Street Journal deserves serious attention because it changes our understanding of the entire regional dynamic. The UAE has been conducting its own military strikes on Iran. One strike in April hit the Lavon Oil Refinery Company on Lavon Island. This was suspected but never confirmed until today. Iran responded by targeting an Emirati refinery. So while the world has been watching the United States and Iran negotiate through Pakistan, the UAE and Iran have been hitting each other's energy infrastructure directly. The UAE is not a passive observer of this conflict. The UAE has its own security interests, its own grievances against Iranian power in the Gulf, its own reasons to want Iran's military capability degraded. And Abu Dhabi has been acting on those interests with military force, in coordination with the broader campaign, but independently enough that it was not publicly acknowledged until a Wall Street Journal investigation confirmed it today. This matters strategically for several reasons. First, it tells you that the coalition against Iran is more active and more operationally engaged than public statements have suggested. Second, it tells you that Iran has been absorbing military pressure from multiple directions simultaneously, not just from the United States and Israel, but from Gulf partners acting in their own interest. Third, it complicates any potential deal, because a peace agreement between Washington and Tehran does not automatically end the UAE-Iran confrontation. Abu Dhabi has its own demands, its own security requirements, its own conditions for standing down. Any comprehensive resolution of this conflict has to account for the UAE's position, and the UAE's position is that it will not accept Iranian military capability that can strike Emirati territory remaining intact and unaddressed. Let me talk about what Iran is doing with the internet cables, because I think this development reveals something about Iranian intentions that goes far beyond the current military crisis. IRGC-affiliated media reported today that Iran is considering imposing fees on the subsea internet cables that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The cables in question, the Falcon Network, the GBI, the Gulf TGN, carry the bulk of internet traffic and financial transactions flowing between Europe and Asia. Iran is modeling this on Egypt's Suez Canal cable revenue, which generates between $250 and $400 million annually. They want to charge per-meter fees and licensing royalties for every cable routed through Iranian territorial waters. I want you to think about what this actually means. This is not a wartime emergency measure. This is a permanent monetization blueprint. This is Iran designing a system to extract ongoing economic value from geographic control of a critical global infrastructure choke point indefinitely. This is Iran saying that regardless of how the current military crisis is resolved, regardless of what any peace deal says, Iran intends to use its position in the Strait to generate permanent economic and strategic leverage over the global digital economy. The cables that carry your internet traffic, the cables that process your financial transactions, the cables that enable cloud computing across 2 continents. Iran wants to be the toll booth on all of it, forever. That ambition is not something that can be negotiated away with a ceasefire agreement. It requires a permanent settlement of the question of who controls the Strait of Hormuz and on what terms. And that question is far more complex and far more consequential than the nuclear issue that has been dominating the headlines. Qatar's decision to ask ships at its main LNG export facility to turn off their transponders is a signal that even America's closest Gulf partners are operating in a state of genuine fear. Qatar hosts the largest American military base in the Middle East. Qatar has been actively involved in diplomatic efforts to de-escalate this conflict. And Qatar is now telling its LNG tankers to go dark, to become invisible to the tracking systems that monitor global shipping movements. The reason is obvious. Visible ships are targetable ships. But the consequence is significant. When Qatar's LNG tankers go dark, the visibility of global natural gas supply chains disappears. Traders cannot track the ships. Markets cannot price supply accurately. And the uncertainty premium in LNG prices goes up, regardless of whether any additional military action occurs. This is the mechanism through which the Strait of Hormuz crisis continues to inflict economic damage on the global economy every single day, through uncertainty and fear, even in the absence of active combat. The Houthis launched 2 drones toward Eilat this morning. Israel intercepted a drone over Eilat, with the Israeli military confirming it came from the east. The Houthis are still there, still firing, still part of the axis of resistance that Iran built and that has proven far more resilient than anyone in Washington or Jerusalem predicted when this campaign began. American and British airstrikes have been hitting Houthi positions in Yemen for more than a year. The Houthis are still launching drones at Israeli cities. They are still attacking Red Sea shipping. The 12% of global trade that normally transits the Red Sea has largely abandoned that route, adding weeks to shipping times and billions of dollars to costs. And no military operation currently on the table addresses the Houthi problem in a way that resolves it rather than simply managing it. The Houthis are going to be part of this picture for a long time, regardless of what happens in the Strait or in the nuclear negotiations. I want to address Chuck Schumer and the Democrats directly, because what is happening in the United States Senate right now is operationally significant, even if it is being dismissed by many analysts as domestic political theater. Schumer wrote on social media that Trump dragged America into an illegal, costly war without goals or endgame, and called it a mini-war. The Democrats are forcing a 7th vote on their War Powers resolution to withdraw American troops from hostilities with Iran. Let me be clear about what I think of this. The War Powers resolution vote is primarily a political exercise designed to create a record and embarrass Republicans rather than a serious attempt to end the conflict. It will not pass. The Republicans have the votes to block it. But the political pressure it represents is real. The cost of this war in economic terms, in energy prices, in strategic uncertainty, is being felt by American voters. The 62% of Americans who told Pew Research that their country has lost this war are the same Americans who voted midterm elections. Trump knows this. His advisors know this. And that political reality is part of why the pressure to produce some kind of visible result, whether through a deal or through a decisive military action that changes the situation on the ground, is building inside the White House. Trump is going to Beijing on May 13th, 2 days from now. The state visit to China, the first American presidential visit in 9 years, is happening in the middle of this crisis for a reason. China needs the Strait of Hormuz open. 30% of China's oil travels through that waterway. China's economy, which is under stress from trade tensions with the United States, cannot absorb an indefinite energy disruption of this scale. And China has leverage with Iran that no other country has. Chinese economic support has been the lifeline that kept the Iranian economy functioning through years of American sanctions. If Beijing delivers a private, direct, unmistakable message to Tehran, the Chinese support depends on serious movement in the nuclear talks. Iran's hardliners face a choice they have not had to face before. The Trump-Xi meeting is the last serious diplomatic opportunity before the options currently on Trump's table move from serious consideration to active implementation. But I want to be honest about the limits of what Beijing can deliver. China's interests and America's interests in the Gulf do not fully align. China wants the Strait open because Chinese oil flows through it. China does not necessarily share America's interest in a permanent resolution of Iran's nuclear program, or in constraining Iranian regional influence. China may be willing to pressure Iran on the immediate crisis, the closed strait, the halted oil flows, without being willing to pressure Iran on the nuclear questions that are at the heart of the American demands. That partial alignment of interests makes the Beijing meeting potentially useful, but not sufficient to resolve the full scope of the disagreement between Washington and Tehran. Let me give you the clearest picture I can of what happens next, because I think the sequence of events in the next 10 days is fairly predictable, even if the specific outcomes are not. Trump goes to Beijing on May 13th. The nuclear issue, the Strait, Chinese components and Iranian missiles, all of it is on the table. Trump returns from China either with a credible Chinese commitment to pressure Iran toward a real deal or without one. If he returns with a commitment, the talks through Pakistan get a new injection of energy and a new deadline. If he returns without one, the options that were on the table in today's national security meeting, restarting Project Freedom, resuming airstrikes against the remaining 25% of Iranian targets, potentially a special forces operation on the uranium stockpile, move from options to orders. 2 American officials have already said Trump is leaning toward action. One said he will tune them up a bit. Another said, "I think we all know where this is going." And Trump himself, in his own words, in public, called the Iranian negotiators crazy, not difficult, not unreasonable, crazy, nuts. I've been watching American presidents make war decisions for 30 years. I know what the language that precedes action sounds like. It sounds like personal frustration. It sounds like dismissal of the other side's rationality. It sounds like a leader who has decided that the person across the table cannot be reasoned with, and therefore must be dealt with by other means. When Trump says you are crazy, you are nuts, he is not venting. He is telling you something. And the ballistic missile submarine in Gibraltar, the carrier strike groups repositioning further from the Strait, the 25% of Iranian targets still on the list, and the special forces option for the uranium stockpile are all telling you the same thing. The decision may not come before Beijing, but after Beijing, if diplomacy does not produce something real, the decision is coming. And everything you have seen today is preparation for that moment.